I just finished watching an interview by a gentleman called Bortwick, his last name, and he was talking about the high-tech industry and the privacy problems that many of the products now are beginning to create for the consumer. And he mentioned something that I want to discuss in this video, which is that he's from New York, I guess, and he is beginning to see these entrepreneurs who already had experience with being part of the high-tech products that now are very popular, but they want to create a different kind of products that do not have that privacy issues attached to them. And he claims that there's a genuine desire to do things differently. Now, I do believe that this is genuine what they're trying to do, and they are realizing that yes, what they've done so far, it's something that was necessary, but now they need to refine this aggressive growth of technology. And he made a good point that these products started as something that was serving the consumer, and now they've gone beyond and become basically a surveillance products. And he said that there are basically so far three models of approaching solutions to this. And the first one is the sort of American one, which is there's all these hearings and the high-tech companies are saying yes, we get it, we understand that there is a serious issue here, we're working on it. And the politicians are basically saying, okay, work on it, but you don't have forever to address this. Eventually we'll come down on you with regulations. Then there's the European model, which is they're not waiting. The politicians are just starting to hit them with regulations, which of course has its own problems because it might actually stifle innovation. And then there's the scary model, which is China, which is no, the Communist Party has absolute control of this surveillance technology, and they will use it to manage society. Now, here's what I think about all this. Again, I believe that these new entrepreneurs are genuine about taking seriously where this technology is going and how it could impact society in a negative way. But I believe that there is also another side to this story, which is some of them are also seeing this as an opportunity. And I'm not being cynical here. This is something that every human being has to deal with, and there is more to just one side to a human being. And these entrepreneurs, my suggestion to them is to be mindful of this side. That is right now like a blind spot. And what eventually, let's say they succeed, they see that okay, the public and the political class is turning against this kind of aggressive surveillance technology, and we have an opportunity here to do the right thing, to make products that are still understand what the consumer needs every second, but at the same time this is not used as a spying technology for nefarious reasons or purposes. And we can launch new products that become popular overnight, And this is, the opportunity, of course. And at the same thing, we do the right thing. But eventually, as these new products or companies begin to establish almost monopolistic share of the market, they will again be lured into sort of what I call the holy grail of revenue stream, which is again, hey, we can use this core information about the individual to maybe nudge him a little bit in this direction or that direction, and they will end up pretty much in the same place. Now it's going to be a refined version of it, a better version of it, but they need to be mindful of this, that there will be a time when they're going to feel this sort of almost like absolute power that they have over the industry, and then they're going to start entertaining the idea of projecting that power for good reasons over the consumers. And they need to understand that the technology needs to align itself with the old struggles that our own Western society has been dealing with. And if they don't align themselves with sort of the democratic, the liberal view on what the individual is in society, sort of this balance between the group versus the individual, they will begin to encounter all sorts of attacks that I don't think they're prepared to take on. And the reason why they might feel that they have the upper hand on this is because so far the challenges that they faced were technological. Competition from other companies who were doing the same thing. And they don't understand that there will come a point where they could go so far away from the pattern that we've been following in the Western world that eventually they're going to start receiving challenges from non-technological angles. Think of it as a backdoor. Regulations is one of the ways. And then they'll suddenly realize that they've acted as the biggest bully who just used, let's say, his size, but he didn't have any martial arts experience. And now there is this small kid who comes around and actually he does martial arts, and for him that size doesn't really do anything. So I think we'll go through a couple of generations of these entrepreneurs that he's referring to, and eventually we'll establish some kind of a balance. But I think it's going to be at least 10 to 20 years before we can kind of package this and put it aside and streamline it. There will be, of course, politicians who will specialize in this. You're going to have go-in-between people. And eventually we'll get it right. And if we don't, we'll pay the price. Okay, so I'll add some bonus material to what I was discussing earlier. So expect to have a very, let's call it, new or unusual jobs definitions that are going to pop up around this issue that I just discussed. One of them is going to be you're going to need people with classical education. What I mean by this is, let's say we're talking about just the Western world. In other parts of the world, they have to do the same thing, but more according to the pattern of managing society and economics and so on, the way they have for hundreds and even thousands of years. So what I mean by classical education, this is individuals who have background in Western philosophy, economics, how they've been evolving. Basically, they have a historical, philosophical awareness of not just what has happened in the last 5-10 years, which of course it's very interesting and it's very sort of rich and aggressive, but within this richness and aggressiveness there are some very old patterns that if you don't understand, you will at first do very well, but eventually you're going to hit a plateau. You're going to start overloading by all this information that is coming, all this richness and aggressiveness, and you're going to burn out. And this is because you're not aware that most of what's coming your way can be mastered by you developing a certain kind of technique in interpreting information and being able to ignore a lot of the noise. And the only way you can do this is by having this sort of historical and philosophical view on the Western history, struggles, trying to manage human nature in relations to politics, economics, society, and so on. So you will have these so-called go-in-between people who are who are aware of both worlds. You know, let's somehow find a way for technology and not what people want today, but what people have always wanted, and make it click together. And I'm not sure what they're gonna call this job, these jobs, but I'm sure they'll come with something catchy. I remember a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, I mentioned to a friend, I said, you know what, I think one day we're gonna need the people that I just described to actually train artificial intelligence. And I said this is going to be one of the sort of coolest jobs that one can do. And recently I read that we are starting to have this kind of professions where you actually kind of fine-tune the artificial intelligence product to sort of iron the wrinkles, because at the end of the day it's not for ourselves. An artificial intelligence product will never behave 100% as a human being, because you see, a human being is never 100% the human being that he was yesterday. This is something that some very intelligent and great people for thousands of years have tried to figure out how to sort of categorize this elusive sort of nature of a human being. And I think we'll continue refining this interface between the machine and the consumer. So I'm not a pessimist on that. I think we will find ways to make this work, but it's not going to be a simple endeavor. Earlier I mentioned the high-tech companies misbehaving in relation to society and individual consumers. But they're not the only player that needs to refine its behavior and desires through the technology that it's at its disposal. we the consumers are playing a similar sort of a game of let's have one up on everybody else. Take for example doxing as a sort of social technological phenomenon. Let's say somebody says something that I disagree with. It's one of those emotional issues that I have, and I find this is a very disrespectful or insensitive, and I use this sort of flaw in protecting the privacy of individual because he's using that technology, and I go after this individual, or I start spreading rumors that are not true about him, and so on. What I will discover eventually is that after a while, people like me are setting up standards, almost like a guideline to how you attack somebody with very little effort, with no price on your side. But there's always a price, and eventually we're gonna find out that we're all paying the price. So this individual or another individual, one day I will say something insensitive, and they will use these guidelines to just, it's almost like streamlined to attack me. So after a while, we're gonna figure it out that we've gone back thousands of years at a point where justice as a concept began forming itself by people who realized that, hey, I can do something to somebody in my tribe or small society, and it takes very little effort on my side to be destructive. But the thing is, this guy also can do exactly the same thing to me. So we have to come to some kind of a agreement. Just because we can do this destructive attack on somebody else, it doesn't mean that we should do it, because it could be done very easily on us. The only time when an individual does not need to be concerned with this is when he has an absolute power. Basically, he can do to others things that cannot be done to him. And I think this is what the individuals, but especially these leaders in the high-tech industry right now are feeling, and not just towards the consumers, but they're feeling the same sort of arrogance, upper hand, even towards other industries. And I think it's already happening. You have some wars going on in the background where, let's say, the information industry is using its upper hand, that they masters of harvesting, manipulating, interpreting information, and they use it to attack the sort of mediocre skills of industries, mediocre skills in information of industries that are not their main skill is not information, but what this information industry is gonna discover in a very painful way is that we live in a very complex system and society, and these old industries, they have not been on top because of some kind of a luck. It's because they have their own weapons, and they are non-technological, and they will begin to use these weapons. And I gave a sort of maybe naive example, but let's say if Google continues to be arrogant in how they interact with other industries, eventually, let's say the energy industry will use their relationship with, let's say, the power companies, where they'll start creating problems for the data centers of Google. And of course, they have to do it in a legal way. But these guys are smart. They know how to create difficulties for the Google data centers in relation to supplying them with electricity, and stay within these legal boundaries. And this is when I call them new money. They're going to realize that, hey, yes, we're dominating these new industries, but old money are dominating the old industries, and they're not easy pickings as much as we thought they are. They have a much stronger relationship in understanding society, in these trends that I talked about. They've dipped their hands deeper into the political class, and we are not the only player here. There's some very old stories that have been going on, which have solidified, and they're very powerful, and they can appeal to society, they can appeal to politicians. And we're the new story, and maybe a lot of what we perceived as absolute power is just novelty, something that it's only in our heads. And yes, it's another little thing, but at the same time it's not as big as we thought. And I think we can also discover that a lot of these high-tech stories that have been right now written and sort of talking about the future paradise that technology is going to create, it's going to turn out that a lot of it was just daydreaming. And this is how I'm viewing the stories about the artificial intelligence. I believe that it is being exaggerated on both sides. Those who are saying that they're going to solve the human condition, well, I'm going to use this opportunity to tell you that that's not solvable. Part of what drives us in life is to continue dreaming that we can solve it, but we should never solve it, nor will we be. Otherwise we're done if we do. But that's a topic for another video. And then there's the other extreme, which says it's the end of the world if the algorithm takes over everything. It's not going to take over everything, because we humans are able to shift what there is to take over. And this is something the machine will never understand. And I also believe that many of the leaders in these high-tech industries are also lacking the nature that is required to understand that angle. These guys are very smart and efficient in creating technology, but because of that, because that they can be less humans, they're so good at the technological stuff. So that's their own innate limitation. And so I think eventually we'll also discover that, you know what, this artificial intelligence, personal assistants and so on have their own limitations. And we're not going to value these stories that the high-tech industry is pushing forward, that they're trying to turn them into belief systems, political systems, economical systems. And the high-tech industry themselves will become a little bit more humble and sort of cut off the fat and just kind of focus on the core of what they really provide to society, with the understanding that they're just one of the 20 or 30 pillars on which this human experiment is standing on.